In a small town in upstate New York lived four friends: John, Sarah, Michael, and Emily. They had known each other since high school and often spent their free time together. One day, during their traditional coffee shop hangouts, the friends decided to organize a trip to the woods. On Friday night, they met at John's house, loaded their backpacks, tents, and food into his old pickup truck, and set off. It was a long drive, about 3 hours. Along the way, the friends joked, listened to music, and made plans for the weekend. Little did they know that this trip would change their lives forever. A few hours later, the car turned off the main road onto a narrow forest trail. John drove confidently deep into the woods, humming softly, until a warning sign blocked the way. "We're going to have to walk the rest of the way, and according to the map, the lake is about 15 minutes from here," John announced, turning off the engine. The friends got out of the car and followed John, breathing in the fresh forest air and admiring the beauty of the wilderness. They were full of anticipation for a wonderful weekend. Some had even brought cameras, hoping to capture and preserve the experience. The clearing the friends came to was surrounded by a dense forest. Tall pine and fir trees towered above them, blocking out the sunlight and creating a mysterious atmosphere. Somewhere in the distance, the sound of a mountain stream could be heard, and the air was filled with the scent of pine needles and wild flowers. This place seemed ideal for a vacation in nature. The friends began unpacking and setting up camp. John and Michael pitched the tents while Sarah and Emily gathered kindling for the fire. Soon, 2 cozy shelters were growing in the clearing, and a fire was crackling merrily between them. The sun began to slip toward the horizon, turning the sky purple. The boys settled around the fire, enjoying each other's company, and as darkness fell, they began to tell scary stories. When it was Michael's turn, he told a chilling legend about an ancient monster that lived in the woods. According to the legend, the creature fed on human flesh and was invulnerable to conventional weapons. Sarah shook her head, thinking it was a silly story, but Emily and John listened with interest. Suddenly, a strange sound came from deep in the forest, like the roar of a bull. The friends froze, listening. The sound repeated itself, this time much closer. "What the hell?" Emily whispered, instinctively moving closer to the fire. "Probably some kind of animal," John suggested, but you could hear the uncertainty in his voice. It was midnight, so Sarah suggested they split up and go to bed. Everyone agreed, hoping that in the morning any fears would seem silly. As they climbed into their tents, they tried to sleep, but every rustling of leaves outside made them gasp. Something ominous seemed to be lurking deep in the dark forest. Morning greeted the friends with overcast skies and an unusual silence in the forest. The birds were not singing, and the wind seemed ominous. As they climbed out of their tents, the boys discovered that Michael had disappeared. His sleeping bag was empty, and his pack was untouched. "Maybe he went to the river?" Emily suggested, concern in her voice. John and Sarah decided to go in search of their friend, while Emily stayed behind to keep an eye on the camp. The boy and girl went deeper into the woods, calling Michael's name. For half a day, they searched the river without finding any sign of their missing friend. Instead, they came across strange, huge paw prints on the wet ground near the shore. It wasn't clear what animal they could have belonged to. The paw prints were too big for any animal they knew. Hours passed. Already a little desperate, but continuing their search, they came to a small clearing and froze in horror. Bits of Michael's bloody clothes lay on the grass. Sarah screamed and John gritted his teeth, trying to stay calm. They realized that something terrible had happened, and that their comrade had most likely fallen victim to a wild animal. Back at camp, John and Sarah shared their frightening discovery with Emily. The girl was frightened and panicked, refusing to believe what had happened. Everyone realized that it was necessary to leave the area as soon as possible and report the incident to the police. However, it was evening, and by lucky chance they did not have flashlights with them. Remembering his friend's plight, John reluctantly suggested that they wait until morning before heading for the car. Sarah and Emily objected until it occurred to them that walking through the woods in the dark would be suicide. There was nothing else to do. They built a large fire and sat side by side, staring into the impenetrable darkness beyond the boundary of the lighted circle. They sat around the fire, listening to every rustle and trying not to give in to the growing panic. Suddenly, a chilling roar came from the darkness, making their blood run cold. The boys jumped to their feet and peered into the night. A massive figure covered in dark fur emerged from behind the trees. The monster's burning red eyes were filled with hate and hunger. The creature moved with incredible speed and approached the camp. John grabbed a burning branch from the fire and swung it at the monster, but it swatted it away like an annoying fly. With a swipe of its clawed paw, it knocked John aside and knocked him unconscious. The girls fled in terror, running in different directions. The monster hesitated for a moment, then rushed after Sarah, who stumbled over roots and rocks and ran toward the river. She hoped to swim to the other side and hide from the monster. But the creature was too quick. In one leap, it caught up to the girl and sunk its claws into her flesh. Sarah's high-pitched scream echoed through the forest, and then there was silence. Emily ran through the trees, the branches whipping at her face and her heart pounding in her chest. She kept running, gasping for breath, and soon came to a small clearing. When she saw the lights of a building in the distance, Emily found hope for rescue. She ran as fast as she could, trying not to hit any rocks or broken trees. As she ran toward the small cabin, Emily heard a terrible roar behind her and looked back. The last thing she saw before she was plunged into darkness was the monster's terrifying fangs sinking into her flesh. John awoke to an excruciating pain in his ribs. He struggled to his feet and looked around. The camp was in ruins and his friends were nowhere to be seen. Pain and despair overwhelmed him, but he knew he had to survive to tell the world what had happened in this cursed forest. John wandered into the night, unsure of what lay ahead, but determined to fight to the end. He waded through the dark forest, his wounded body aching with pain. Every step was difficult, but knowing that to stop would mean certain death, he kept going, not really caring where he was going. Behind him came the cracking of branches and the growl of a monster hunting its last victim. John tried to move as quietly as he could, weaving between the trees and trying to throw the monster off his trail. Suddenly, he saw a gap between the trunks ahead, and he darted toward it, hoping to find shelter. When he came to a small clearing, he found an old hunting lodge, almost completely overgrown with moss and vines. He rushed inside, slamming the flimsy door behind him. Once in relative safety, John collected his thoughts and began searching for something that could serve as a weapon against the monster. After a few minutes, to his surprise, he found an old shotgun and a few rounds of ammunition. He realized that his chances against the monster were slim, but it was better than nothing. Suddenly, the door of the hut rattled under the heavy blows. The monster had found its hiding place and was trying to break through. John braced himself for one last fight, knowing it was his only chance to escape. He loaded the shotgun and pointed the barrel at the door. As the monster burst in, John squeezed the trigger. A deafening shot rang out and the monster recoiled, wounded but not killed. John kept firing until he used up all his ammunition. The monster collapsed to the ground, bleeding but still breathing heavily. Gathering his last ounce of strength, John ran from the cabin, hoping to reach civilization before the monster woke up. He ran through the woods, not caring what path he took, until he reached the highway. Exhausted, he collapsed on the pavement as the lights of an approaching car appeared in the distance. John was picked up by a couple of hikers who had been traveling the forest roads. They were shocked by his appearance. Tattered clothes, multiple wounds, and a crazed look. John asked them to take him to the nearest police station, claiming that something terrible had happened in the woods. The tourists, not fully understanding the situation, agreed to help. Once at the station, John told his story, but was met with disbelief and skepticism. The police organized a search of the woods, but found neither the bodies of his dead friends nor any trace of the monster. As the years passed, John learned to live with the pain of loss and guilt over his dead friends. He could never fully accept the fact that he had failed to save them. Every night he had nightmares in which he relived that terrible night in the woods. My legs don't want to carry me anymore, and my shoulders hurt from the heavy pack. I've been walking through this damn forest for 6 hours now, and the guys are nowhere to be found. I lost the team about 2 hours ago, and I still haven't seen any sign of them. It's like they just vanished into thin air. Shouting is the first rule of an experienced hiker. Wild animals may come running to your voice. As I wander aimlessly between the trees, looking around in vain, I start to get goosebumps from the cold. The sun has dropped below the horizon. It's completely dark. "What are you doing here, son?" An old man in his 60s comes out from behind a tree. He has gray hair on his head and kindly blue eyes. "Woodsman," immediately comes to mind. "Yes, I lost mine." I start rubbing my hands. My hands are frozen and I lost my gloves a few hours ago. The old man saw my movements, smiled, and suggested, "Let's go to my place. You'll warm yourself by the stove, drink tea. I'll tell you the way, and your boys will find you, don't worry. The forest is big, but I know every path here." I shrugged and followed the old man. There was no other choice anyway. The dawn was getting darker. We started. The old man walked rather slowly because of his age, so to pass the time I decided to make conversation. The old man turned out to be an excellent listener and a pleasant conversationalist. "May I ask why you don't have a weapon with you? There are wild beasts in the forest. Isn't it dangerous to walk around so lightly?" "I've lived in this forest since I was born. All the animals know me and I know them," the old man replied, smiling from under his broad mustache. "What about the wolves? I have heard that they are especially aggressive here. And I am not afraid of the wolves. They obey me. I even feed them from time to time." I stopped asking questions and just walked along in silence. Obviously, the old man has problems with his head from such a way of life when he talks about friendship with wolves. Half an hour later, we came to a small clearing surrounded by tall trees and bushes. In the center of the clearing were stones in the shape of a circle. It looked like an altar. To my surprise, the old man stopped and became silent, then began to sink slowly to the ground. As I walked around him from the other side and took a quick look, I realized that the old man had gotten worse. He was on his knees, his eyes were closed, and he was whispering something very softly. I was frightened by his condition and began to ask him excitedly which way his hut was. I swear, I was ready to take him in my arms and walk as long as it took to reach the long-awaited shelter, but the old man paid no attention to me. Suddenly I heard a high-pitched howl from far away, and a few seconds later a few more, but a little to the left. It was clear as day that a pack of wolves had begun their usual rounds in search of dinner. Under other circumstances, I would not have been frightened, for I knew how to avoid wolves and cover my tracks. But I was not alone, and I was disturbed by the behavior of the old man, who kept whispering something. I ran to the nearest bushes, lurked, and began to think of possible ways to proceed, when suddenly I heard a loud howl just a few meters from me. As before, a moment later the howling was repeated, but from different directions, from the front and from the sides. I froze even more, but this time I was terrified. At some point there was a crunching sound under my foot, but it didn't sound like a branch being crushed. I slowly looked down and saw bones. Realizing that they were human, I involuntarily looked at the old man. He was looking straight at me with his eyes wide open and a smile on his face. The sight was horrifying, and after a moment the old man said loudly, "Enjoy your meal, my children." The next thing I knew, the wolves began to appear one by one in my hiding place and began to circle around me. Refusing to believe what was happening, I was instantly on my feet and scampered away. After about 20 seconds, a couple of wolves caught up with me and started biting my legs, trying to immobilize me. Realizing that I had nothing to lose, I called out for help, hoping that someone was nearby. Blood trickled down my legs and my strength began to fail, when suddenly shots rang out. Several of the wolves fell dead instantly. Others were wounded and scurried away. The last thing I saw before I lost consciousness was flashlights moving quickly toward me in the deep darkness. When I woke up in the hospital room, I found my team in full force beside my bed. When I asked them about the woodsman, they told me they hadn't seen anyone but a pack of hungry wolves. Apparently the old man was luring loners to that altar and feeding them to the wolves. For what purpose? I realize now that sometimes breaking the rules saves lives. Dylan carefully checked his trusty rifle and ammunition, as he always did before a hunt. He walked around the house making sure everything he needed was in his pack. A camp knife, a compass, warm clothes in case it got cold, dried meat and water. Hunting is a serious business. You can't rely on luck. In these backwoods of West Virginia, one wrong move can cost you your life. After arriving at the site and breathing in the fresh morning air, he moved deeper into the thicket in search of prey. He hoped to shoot a large white-tailed deer. After several hours of fruitless searching, the man finally spotted a stately buck grazing peacefully in a sunlit clearing. He slowly took aim. Inhale, exhale, squeezed the trigger. But his hand shook at the crucial moment, and the bullet grazed the animal, sliding along its torso. The deer shuddered and ran, leaping over rocks and fallen trees with determination. Dylan followed the bloody trail into a deep, swampy part of the forest where no man had ever set foot. The trees grew thick, barely letting in the sun. The silence was deafening, broken only by the sound of an owl or the splash of water. The hunter finally found his prey, but to his surprise, he was not the first. What he saw made his blood run cold. A skinny creature with eerie, unnaturally long limbs and dead pale skin leaned over the dead body of the deer. Sharp claws tore through the flesh with ease, and the lipless mouth was smeared with blood. It was neither man nor beast, but like one of those nightmarish forest monsters from the old Indian legends. Dylan had never believed in such things, but it was probably a Wendigo before his eyes. The creature turned sharply toward him, staring at him with unblinking black eyes. There was a shrill howl of rage, and the monster leapt across the distance between them. The man ran away, ducking between the trees and trying not to slip on the bloody grass. The monster ran after him, ducking to the ground on its long limbs. A pickup truck appeared ahead. With his last breath, Dylan ran to the truck and jumped in, panting, then turned to slam the door. Just then, a clawed paw slammed into his shoulder. The man screamed in terror and wild pain. His heart pounded furiously. He grabbed a nearby shotgun and fired indiscriminately at the creature through the window, recoiled and growled, which only seemed to make it angrier. Another shot rang out, this time hitting the monster in the side. Dylan floored the accelerator and twisted the steering wheel, knocking over small trees and splashing mud from puddles. The monster howled as it continued to chase the car, leaping over obstacles with inhuman agility. The pickup was picking up speed. Looking in the rearview mirror, the man saw that the creature was still far behind him, but it was still following him without swerving. All the way to town, Dylan kept his foot on the gas, looking back at the terrifying creature in the mirror. When he reached his hometown, he went straight to the hospital. Luckily, his arm was saved, although the doctors still don't believe in the cause of the deep wounds.